All right. Welcome to another session of Authentic Selling Live. Hopefully, you caught yesterday's session. Again, we're here with Kevin Warner. He is the CEO and founder over at Leadium. Kevin, for those who maybe didn't catch yesterday's session, why don't you just give them a little bit of background on yourself, and then I'll tell them, do a quick recap of what we covered yesterday and what we're going to be covering today.
Yeah, I mean, the quick and dirty is Leadium. Myself, we've been doing outsourced sales development for coming up 9 years now, since 2014. So kind of taking advantage of sales technology in 2014, 15, 16, when it was really catapulting, realizing that while we're not tech founders ourselves, we're really good on the agency side. And how do we utilize technology, the access of data, and really capitalize a lower risk option for companies who aren't looking to hire full-time sales development reps, but still capitalize on top of funnel with the best strategies and approaches. Hence, Leadium came about. Obviously, our market has blown up over the years as more and more agencies are created. And it really comes down to understanding strategy a bit differently, understanding different approaches that are working, being able to look at top of funnel from an optimization side, strategy side that a lot of internal teams can't step outside of the box and look at because it's so activity driven. So that's the quick and dirty, overcap of Leadium.
Awesome. Appreciate that. And yesterday we talked a lot about optimizing for different channels, not treating all of the channels in your outbound strategy the same, how to approach those, how to actually target people that have signals that would maybe help you identify if a particular channel for them would be more successful, right? People who
Right.
prefer to talk on the phone, people that are socially active on social, all of those sort of things. And then we briefly touched on, some of the messaging stuff. But that's going to be the primary focus today. Is we're going to talk about how to really nail your messaging, whether that's across email or these other channels as well. So I just want to kind of set the bar here of let's talk a little bit about what's not working, right? You have a lot of people that come to you that are typically struggling with outbound. They've tried some things, it's not working. And they usually come to, somewhere like Leadium to try to fix those problems. So you probably see some trends across what people are doing in outbound and with their messaging specifically that is not working.
Yeah, I would say that two key factors of what's not working. One, just not knowing your market well enough to understand how to personalize a message to a segment. You're kind of overselling. You're selling the features, you're selling the product. You're not talking to the individual or how you can help them. You don't need to know really specific details on call-in or specific pain points. If you're doing segmentation well enough and you know how you can target those segments, you can kind of speak to or assume that that group shares commonalities and speak directly to that. But a lot of people don't, and they don't know how to segment and then build campaigns upon segments. So that's probably the first, is kind of selling the features, selling client examples, selling what you've done in the past. And a lot of people just don't care about that anymore. They don't care about the logos you've worked with. It's more about, well, what can you do for my problem that I have? And the second is just not understanding the complexities of copy, thinking it's and having too robust of an idea of it's my copy that works, don't use that. And I always put it internally, when you're writing, who cares who's right when it comes to copy? I have a different writing style than you, than does the next person. We always laugh about how in high school your English teacher taught you how to write in these complex paragraphs that when you get to college they say, well, forget all of that. Copy is so subjective that you just need to optimize and test. It doesn't matter who's right. It matters that somebody's right and the structure is right. But I find that a lot of people get offended when, you say, hey, that's not a good writing style, or, hey, you should write in a 7th or an 8th grade writing style, because that's, statistically what converts higher when it comes to B2B sales. And so there's a lot of opinions around writing, just in the style, the grammar, the content, when you're not even getting into, the value propositions at that point.
Yeah. But there's also a thought of like, who you're actually writing to, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of this could be a lot of factors, right? It could be um, if we look at like a persona lens, it could be, the size of the company, it could be the title, the seniority, it could even be, what age bracket are
Yep.
they in? And then, of course, my personal favorite, what their personality type is, right? So, any tactical tips for like any of those things that I called out of how you would write differently based on those data points?
Here's the number one thing that we find that converts at the highest rate is talking to a human. And you can't forget that there's a human behind, whether it's phone call, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's email, there's a human there. And psychologically we want to connect, and we're not off-putting, we are open. So if it has the appearance that it's a one-to-one, that you're reaching out to somebody specifically, you'll most likely have a more impactful response, even if it's a no. Right, in outbound, having a no is a good response because that allows you to kind of shift your strategy. And taking that mindset, that's where things like personality come into trait, and why we're partners at Ledium with a company like Humantic is because, hey, outside of the value propositions, we need to understand that as humans, we consume differently from one person to the next. You consume text differently. You inherently like different books than I do. You have different interests than I do. You have different grammar styles than I do. And all of that comes into effect at the outbound channel on how are you adjusting your segmentation for the person, not for the value proposition for the segment, but how are you presenting your value propositions for that segment based on the individual behind it? And how are you then adjusting it for the channel that you're engaging them with? If you think about on the digital ad side, an 18 to 25-year-old, you're going to engage them differently on TikTok than you will on Instagram, than you will on Facebook. Those are different methods of consumption that user is doing. You're consuming different type of media, so you're engaging ad sets differently. That's why the ad structures are different. So you're seeing a lot of that being married over in the B2B outbound space. And that's why, like the Humantics of the world are becoming so much more interesting. It's because I can take the message that I developed, but now I can cater it directly to your personality trait. And that's where you're seeing an exponential increase in conversions. And that's how you're accomplishing kind of quote unquote personalization at scale, because I'm personalizing not only my message to Colin, who's in a market segment that I know very well, but also to Colin, the individual, based on how he's going to best consume what I'm trying to present.
And I love that. I mean, the thing is, the thing is, personalization at scale works well when done right. It
Right.
takes a lot of preparation before hit and go on the sequence, right? If you're doing research on a one-off person, or if you're doing research, on a list of people, it doesn't really matter,
Right.
right? You can still insert that properly to personalize it to the person and to also deliver it in the communication style of who you're sending it to, right? And the idea that that can't be done at scale is ridiculous. It just takes a level of strategic planning and thinking, and a little bit of patience, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to load up the context and hit go, but to do it right, you can. A lot of this information is available. You just have to look for it, know where to look for it, maybe even have somebody fully dedicated to doing that prior to those lists getting in the hands of the SDRs or BDRs.
Exactly. I mean, to take it a step further, and really what you're and from yesterday's conversation where we talked about like specialization of resources, specialized SDRs who are calling, specialized SDRs who handle email. What you're going to start to see more and more happen is specialization even within those segments of tasks. And that's, if I know Colin is X personality, or if I know Colin is a 50-year-old CRO, I most likely don't want to call Colin if I'm doing a call task with a 23-year-old first time SDR who's been on the job for 4 months. I probably want to call Colin with maybe a pair. somebody who is also 45 or 50, who understands what that person's going through, can speak to them on commonalities. And so you're seeing that, hey, not only is the messaging, not only is the value proposition being catered, but now how we're actually engaging that person needs to be catered to the individual as well. And that's where you're starting to see the conversion rates on outbound just skyrocket.
Yeah, and to even take it further, I mean, you could even have specialized people that are compatible with the people that
Right.
they're reaching out to, so that they can just be their natural selves to increase the results. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can tackle this to really, nail the messaging to your persona in order to get, results
Yeah.
that are not used to even seeing. I mean, to be more specific, like on our side, we see people get anywhere from 100 to a 256% increase on response rates just by segmenting well and personalizing to the person, which is exactly what you're talking about. Now, I also want to talk about a little bit about, kind of a little bit off of yesterday's session, right? Where we talked about these different channels. We're talking about messaging. But what sort of triggers do you look for inside of a sequence to then, you know, um, identify maybe you should reach out on a different channel? Like, this is happening on email. Maybe it's now
Yeah.
this is a good trigger that we should now call on phone and have a much more warm conversation. And then what does that conversation look like versus just like a standard, fired up a list in a dialer and hit go cold call?
Yeah, we call them kind of quote unquote micro engagements if you're in our sales process. And how do you look at the micro engagements of a prospect who's engaging in some way but isn't converting yet? And that's really where we're still on kind of the entrance into building out this robust strategy as it gets more and more complex. One, you can do a lot of pre research on your individual. If I understand that you're a heavy LinkedIn user, if I know that you're commenting on people's comments, you're liking posts, you're actually making 5, 6, 10, 15 posts a month, I can probably cater you to a high, like a social sequence, because you've already identified that LinkedIn as one of your primary engagement channels. If I know that you answer phone calls, that's obviously a priority. There's more and more companies coming about who might kind of try to identify who answers calls versus who doesn't. Because if you're going to spend time, if you're going to sit down and spend 1 hour of calling, don't you want to call 20 people who are more likely or have a higher propensity to answer calls? So that's just the pre-research in what campaigns do we prioritize them on. Knowing that I'm not only going to do LinkedIn to high LinkedIn users, I still need to do a cross channel. The reason you'll never just do one channel versus the other, because it's still an impressions game. Most acquisitions or acquisition channels are based on impressions. I want to capitalize on as many impressions as possible across channels so that you become more familiar with the brand. But you're doing a lot of pre-research to understand the sequences. Once a sequence is live, it becomes a matter of how do you capitalize on those micro engagements. If you've opened an email twice or 3 times, does that trigger a next action? Yes. If you've connected but you didn't respond, do you immediately, send an email when somebody accepts a connection request? No, because we know categorically that's what happens in the market. So one of your goals is to stand out. You don't want to send a 3-paragraph email on LinkedIn right after a connection. Maybe wait a week and a half or 2, because you're playing a channel. It's not an immediate home run hit. You got to get some singles on the base. So you're using each channel kind of off of each other, and then knowing, most important, that the messaging is different on all 3 channels. You have to customize the message for how that channel is actually being engaged. That's probably the one that's the worst culprit of people. And I think anyone who has LinkedIn connections and you're being sold to can feel this. And that's that immediate LinkedIn connection, immediate 3-paragraph call to action that has no customization. That's not how you use LinkedIn. That's how you use email a lot of times. You shouldn't even be using email like that. So you're trying to take a shortcut and just creating one message and just using it across channel, where really you should be tailoring it. We aren't big believers in just calling ahead of something like email. So yes, I'm just going to place just as many dials, but let me call behind email, because now I can capitalize on that impression. You may be familiar with us already. So you're kind of playing it in that aspect and one and off of each other, and then adjusting the messaging as it pertains to that channel.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the thing that I see where people go wrong with this most often is that they're literally sending the same message. Whether they
Yeah.
get you on the phone. I mean, their LinkedIn DMs look like emails that are too long to even be an email in the first place. I mean, there's a lot of different factors. I mean, personally, and this could be partially my personality, right? Is on LinkedIn, like I want something short, sweet, and a little bit like informal. Like I don't want something super long. But how do you take, what you're sending across email, put it into a LinkedIn DM
Yeah.
that is, what you've seen work on LinkedIn and still get your point across?
Yeah, that's a great question. But I'll tell you one strategy that's actually having more and more pickup that we're seeing it and we're implementing it more is when you're selling as a team. And that means you really have to think about outbound as a campaign. And now you have to think about it as I'm a campaign manager with multiple sellers. And where I lead this is you can have an SDR doing email and managing that aspect of it and doing the research. And then those LinkedIn activities, if let's say Colin's on my team, the LinkedIn activity might happen from a Colin or a more senior profile. Still on the team, still managing them. Same as the calling aspect. Maybe I have an AE who is really good at calling, and I can take the micro engagements. I know people who have opened emails, and I can provide a list to him of, hey, these are people who have opened emails more than 3 times within the last 48 hours. And I think it would be good if you call them. So not an SDR, but now you're having a more senior call because we have
Mm.
their direct dials. They've showed interest, meaning they've opened but haven't response, if you can trust open rates today. But let's just assume you can. They've opened but haven't responded. And we've sent them a connection request. And so maybe you call them. So you're having this team sales effort, which is, again, going to that specialized resource, but now saying, hey, I don't have to be an AE just dependent on an SDR setting appointments. We can actually come at this in multiple directions where you're having different levels of roles sell into the same account, but not only sell into the same account, sell into the same prospect. So you're getting impressions in multiple channels across multiple titles within your team as well. And you're seeing that have much more pickup on a strategy side.
Yeah, I think I love that strategy. We even, do some of that ourselves here at Humantic. But I want to talk about the person that might be thinking, well, that seems like it wouldn't work, right? Or there's a lot of reasons that
Yeah.
it could go wrong, right? Because you also don't want to overwhelm the prospect where it's like, you got to make sure that if your team selling that there's a strategy and a process that gets followed, that's in place. And so it's not like, hey, Kevin just sent you an email and a LinkedIn
Yeah.
DM, then Colin sent you a DM 5 minutes later. Walk me through, like, how do you map that
That's
out?
where that's where the messaging comes in play, right? And not only you got to remember you're not always selling in every one of these channels. LinkedIn shouldn't be, we are big believers, LinkedIn shouldn't be a sales unit. It should be a grow your organic network unit. And organically, if you connect with Colin from an interest perspective and hey, we're in the same network, then on the next email, he'll be familiar with your company already. So you don't have to use every channel and try to do a hard sell. So it comes back to the messaging isn't always about home run trying to sell. If I have our CRO reaching out to Colin on LinkedIn because we've already started a campaign to it, it might be just a simple, hey, Colin, it seems like we're in the same network. I think some of my team's even targeting you on this. I just wanted to be connected. It looks like you have some great content on here. Looking forward to following what you do. That's it. Leave it at that. Colin connected, saw it, probably replied back. You don't need to use it for a hard sell at that point because you're going to be following up on an email. So you have to remember that this is a long game with that strategy, with the sequence strategy as well.
Yeah. And I think just to add another layer there to it is if you're using LinkedIn as part of your outbound strategy, if you're in B2B, you should be, number one. But number two, I think, Kevin made a great point here is, don't be too quick to go to the hard sell. on LinkedIn, because then you're just like every other person on LinkedIn. And the example that Kevin gave there is the easiest way to not be like every other
Right.
person on LinkedIn. And where this can even work really well is if you also have content as part of your strategy. If you're connecting with these senior people that you're trying to, accounts you're trying to break into, they're accepting and you're not hard selling, and you're dropping content regularly that's adding value and speaking to the problems that you know that they have, that's where this works really well.
Yeah, and another point to that that's super interesting, and Colin, obviously, and something Sergey, my co-founder, and I just started to get into is I think we've started to focus too much on outbound prospecting as home run hits for sales opportunities today, this month, this quarter, instead of understanding that, hey, this is a pipeline, and a lot of the work we do this quarter via outbound could be 3 quarters. We'll see the benefit of it 3 quarters from now. A lot of sales leaders still want home run hits, just more activity now, now, now. We need our goals now. And the problem is it's a compounding problem in that you're not building it the right way. You're not using it strategically. And now you're always up against the gun of now, now, now. Whereas if you did it the right way at the beginning, and what I mean by all this is we have a lot of account executives or VPs of sales that we work with who just want meetings booked. And then we sit back and say, hey, you're actually a thought leader in your space. Have you ever thought about doing outbound to just get on industry podcasts and to build your company's brand by becoming a thought leader? Obviously, you still need appointments being set, but outbound has such multifaceted approach that could drive pipeline to your organization. Why don't you think about campaigns differently in that aspect as well, where it becomes more of a marketing play? You can drive inbound leads from your approach. You also have content now that you can repost, you can share with people, you can drive attract. So we're trying to see, hey, there's more crossover now between marketing and building a more strategic approach to building a pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, that I love that example there for many reasons. And the interesting thing is, we are talking about messaging, right? But this is relevant if you're making a cold call, if you're sending an email, if you're sending a LinkedIn DM, or even posting content. What does that messaging look like? Is
Yeah.
that relevant to the people that you're trying to target? Is that messaging something that's going to help them view you as somebody who can teach them something they don't know, solve a problem that they have, challenge their thinking a bit? Because then social actually starts to become an inbound channel when everybody else is treating it as an outbound channel.
I mean, yeah. No, I still put that the biggest problem with most organizations, and we deal with very large sales organizations all the way down to mom and pop, is most don't have content. Most don't know too much about their go to market on how to adjust messaging. And most are saying we need appointments today or activity today. So that's where you can really build out a unique multi messaging approach when it comes to outbound, to one, focus on appointments and the low hanging fruit, two, build a marketing play into it. I always say, hey, your goal with outbound should be get on phones with your decision makers, whether that's under the pretext of they have a need and you solve that right away,
Hmm.
or whether that's under the pretext of, hey, our company's putting together a white paper about XYZ. We would love to talk to you. And we get some pushback on that from our clients, where it would say, hey, they don't want to buy. They're just having an info conversation. Yeah, but you're having a conversation with the exact company that you want to sell. And why is that a negative? You should only see that as a net positive of a relationship being built, of being able to follow up with them, producing some content from their input. And if you're a good account executive, maybe you can flip that conversation into a second call where you actually get a demo what you're able to do for them. So I think the goal should be more about, hey, having a conversation with your ICP, and how do you have messaging that kind of drives that desire to get on a phone with you, not always just about your value proposition.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely takes a level of thinking um, to be thinking about the long game, right? And the thing is most people, like you said, have their back up against the
Yeah.
wall. They need results yesterday. and it doesn't create the space to think more long term like this.
Yeah, which then it boils it back down to the easiest way to drive a conversion is understanding the human behind the email or behind the phone or behind the LinkedIn and writing to that human. That's where things like Humantic, that's where things like ChatGPT are trying to start to help more and more. Is how do I personalize this still at scale for that human, and to drive the conversion? And I like you should be writing like you're explaining what you do or talking as if you're in a grocery store and someone just walks up to you and says, "Hey, what do you do?" Sadly, most of us are talking as if we're, robots just putting down value propositions and pain points and thinking that that's connecting with the end user.
Yeah, yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about um, building personas, right? Let's take a step back for a second because we kind of went into the messaging quite a bit here. Where do you think people miss the mark on their targeting, like building out the persona of here's who we'd love to work with versus here's who's going to actually respond to messages on outbound to build pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question because you would think that a lot of organizations have that hammered out. You built a product specific to a pain point, specific to a group. How do we talk to that? But most don't know. And that's the complexity of we haven't figured out go to market. So that's where you really have to not only build out personas, but even market segments before personas. What types of companies are we targeting and why? And how does the value of what we can provide differentiate against those targets for whatever reason, whether it be
Mhm.
geography. We have a lot of environmental impact companies that work with us who are targeting governments. And they would say, hey, one of the easiest market segments is target progressive states versus non progressive, because we have progressive policies that we're trying to get into the local governments. And not to say that non progressive states are still a priority, but we know that there's going to be quicker action on a progressive state. So that's a market segment with a direct value proposition. A lot of companies just don't know it from that perspective. Then you get into persona within market segments as well. So now you're going, dividing it up even further. And a lot don't know who the buyer is. And the larger of an account you go to becomes the more questions about who is actually our decision maker. If you're at 1,000-person company, there could be 50 marketing managers, and who's actually overseeing this initiative. And how do we build messaging around we just don't know who is the decision maker? Should we be building messaging around trying to find out who that person is and then selling to them? Or do we just sell to all 50 marketing managers equally with the same messaging with no adjustments so that everyone, who's sitting next to each other theoretically is getting the same email on the same day? A lot of times you're not spreading it out. So there's a lot of strategy that has to go into who is your decision maker and how does that change based on your market segments, based on the company size you're selling into. Does your persona targets change? What problems do personas have based on size or market or title or whatever? And a lot of companies just haven't built it out that much. And what I found is a lot of companies who have almost got almost did it too much, where they become paralyzed by it, where they get into these robust charts of segments and value propositions and pain points and use this one over here and this one over here, when really it's just a simple, hey, for that point, why them or why that person or why are they your decision maker? But it takes a lot of time, and I think it's that investment of figuring that out that a lot of companies aren't willing to put in place. And so now it becomes an activity driven machine where you do send the same message to 5 people at the same company with no adjustments. And we've all gotten them, right? If you have the same 2 personas of the same title at your company, 100% you get the same message, no adjustments.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, just to kind of tie it back to what we were discussing earlier, that's where, people are not personalizing enough to the person and they're selling only to the persona, right? And that's when that message comes across, doesn't feel very authentic, doesn't feel very human. It feels like just some, templated spam that just got fired in the cannons.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you have two competing efforts that you got to personalize very quickly on, and that's you're selling to the company, not the person a lot of times. So what you're able to do is oftentimes the benefit to the company, but the person is the person who's kind of overseeing that task and is the human element to it. So you kind of have to capitalize on both of those ideas very efficiently in 3 sentences, in 4 sentences. But yeah, it's oftentimes where everyone goes wrong.
Kevin, another great session. Appreciate it. We covered a lot in these 2 sessions, tons of value for folks. Any final thoughts as we wrap it up? And then for those that joined us today, where's the best place for them to find out more, learn, and connect with you?
Yeah, easiest place for us is Ledium.com. Myself, LinkedIn is probably the best place, which is just Kevin Warner if you type it in the search box. But yeah, takeaways is messaging is going to become the king. You have to understand the individual. You have to write to the person. You have to personalize it using things like Humantic. That's going to become the key. The idea of just launching and sending is going to continue to put you in a bad spot and not see the conversions.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who joined us. And we will let everybody know about the next session that we'll be having soon as well.